Welcome to this ISRICM webinar, the third out of a series of 4. And today we have a warm welcome to all of you, Julia, Roy, and Lars. And this is a setup that I've really been looking forward to talk about leadership in different perspectives. And you have quite a different perspective and quite a different professional background, which I'm really looking forward to hear more about, and also your thoughts on leadership in general. So let's begin to talk about how leadership and inclusion and identity and impact has to do with both our work organizations, but also how we can lead in the future better concerning these topics. So the first round is that I will give you the word and give you the chance to introduce yourself, starting with you, Julia, in just two seconds. But the idea is that you shortly introduce yourself, and then I have an add-on question that I'll give you, and then you have like a maximum of 5 minutes. Of course, it's always more fun if you can be within those 5 minutes, the time limits, so we are able to hear from everybody. So first of all, Julia Pearson, welcome. And if you were to talk just shortly about yourself and what you're passionate about, but also I know that you work within health innovation, and you also work a little bit with also how do we implement some of these things that you're passionate about. In your perspective, how do you see leadership in this cross field of both health innovation and cross-border practice? And do you see any gaps in the European system right now? If we want to be better at supporting people with multiple identities or with different vulnerabilities. So that's an entire question for you, and let me hear what your thoughts on this is.
Oh, thank you, Nina. And thank you for having me here. And thank you guys for doing this very important initiative. This is really close to my heart because I'm Ukrainian born and I have moved to Sweden during my student years. I spent most of my life in Sweden, in Denmark, but definitely my Ukrainian heritage and also my extended family who is moving to Denmark, who has moved to Denmark, are very close to my heart, and it's an important topic for me. So from the professional perspective, I have a combination of 20 years in the corporate career, where I started from corporate treasury at Maersk, moved into banking, and then moved to in the big tech like AWS and Accenture, driving the digital transformation in the most regulated environments. And now I'm focused on women's health. And as for many women who are in women's health, this journey is almost always personal. And so it was for me. So I'm working with Sita Health, which is a vertical AI platform helping women to prevent their chronic diseases through the perimenopause as a window opportunity. And then I'm working with Women's Health 2040, which is a systemic change initiative, the framework that helps us in the Nordic to coordinate our efforts to make a sustainable change in women's health. So that's about myself a little bit. And then answering your question, what does leadership look like in my work? I think there are many different angles to it, depending also on the different backgrounds I'm coming from. So I've been through the corporate leadership in many different roles. I have led others, I've led leaders. And I also was leading multiple virtual teams spread across different geographies. And now I'm also navigating the area of more like a policy shaping, which is also a different area of leadership. But one thing that I think is common across all the different areas is that when we are in the leadership positions, it's always a balance between understanding the outcomes you're trying to achieve, but also the risks you are taking on. And many leaders, I think, including myself, are having a choice to make and looking at the risks they're facing. Sometimes it's difficult to prioritize people who may look like they would bring more risk than the benefit from the first side. So what we do, we fall back to our biases, and our biases are usually to choose and to select people who are like us, who look like us, who
Yeah.
talk like us, who speak the same language, literally, right? And that's where it becomes very difficult to
Mm.
for a person who is coming from a different background, who may
Yeah.
look different, who may not be perfect in the native language, to put forward all their best abilities. So I've been working with myself through entire my career to make sure that I'm aware of this bias, and I'm trying to mitigate that, of being aware and kind of looking at more openly. So because what I found out that people who may not look like an immediate match right away can have a lot of capabilities that, if they allowed, are coming forward to. And that's, I think, what would be the most, for me, important thing, to go across all the different layers of leadership. I'll pause there for a second, not to go over time. So, and maybe guys, if you have any other comments or inputs on
Yeah,
it.
but I think that it's a really, really good point that you're making there, to as a starting point to actually say, okay, so to be curious about where is my own biases, and can I in some way work with them and be very accurate about how they look like and how I can actually move them more. So thank you very much for that important point, Julia. Moving on to you, Roy, and welcome to you also, a warm welcome. You have quite a different background. You have and you have the chance to introduce yourself. I think you're better than that than I am, but you are working as a conductor, but also as a leadership educator. Um, but you also you work with big ensembles, and you work with, of course, with leadership also, and leadership culture. How do you translate the things that you're doing with an orchestra and into the leadership arena? And how do you see that as how are they intertwined within your passion and your field of work?
Well, yeah, that's a huge question. Thank you so much for the introduction and for inviting me to this wonderful webinar today. So I've been performing as an orchestra conductor for the past 20 years or so. Before that, I was a classical soprano. And during those years, I've seen that there are certain leadership tools that are never taught in the music academy, that are required from a conductor, but also can translate into really amazing leadership tools for all sectors out there. So for the past 10 or 15 years, I've been lecturing at firms and working with executives one-on-one to establish those different tools and to really enhance their, let's say, soft skills, but not only that, to really use those specific, let's say, those talents that are required from performers out there, especially from conductors, but all musicians, that have to do with excellent communication, verbal and nonverbal. They have to do with presence, with managing stress at very, very high stakes situations, fast recovery, resilience, all these tools that, when I just started 10, 15 years ago in the leadership arena, we did not know that AI would be such a huge thing, and right now, nowadays, looking even just on the last 6 years with COVID and everything that's going on in the world, we see that resilience and communication and the ability to inspire and motivate the people around you, these abilities become so much more important than, understanding how to do this spreadsheet or to analyze anything else, because we have amazing tools for that. But what we don't have is, people that can connect, can inspire, can lead, truly lead others. I mean, these abilities are just going out the window nowadays. We can see that not just in obviously the corporate world, but everywhere around us, that we are all much more depressed, much more alone, much more isolated. So this really affects leaders even more because we're responsible for people, for outcomes. And so what I've been doing is translating that connection that is vital on stage in classical music and in all types of music, but definitely when you're leading an orchestra, that connection between myself and the musicians, and therefore to the audience as well, and bringing that into the corporate world. So and I've also I have the privilege of working as a leadership excellence leadership program director for allied health professions. So I bring all that into this this role as well, so that it's more of a systematic transformation, and not only when I'm invited to work, as a speaker or as a coach. So yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. And what comes to mind when you talk about your work is also that has to be, you have to be sort of a really good organizer of the common feeling or atmosphere within the of course within the ensemble, but of course also somehow how you connect with the audience as well as a group, and conduct these things that are an emotional experience for people to listen to, I can imagine. So really, really interesting to have your perspective as well into this. And moving on to you, Lars, you started in when the war started in Ukraine. You started a Danish-based NGO, Aid Ukraine. And but you've also, of course, worked a lot internationally with the NWA. But when you look at leadership, how do you see that has changed? The challenges has changed, working both within culture, urgency, language. How do you see leadership, and what the key component of a good leadership is, in your perspective?
Well, first of all, maybe Julia, you had a short comment before I begin.
Thank you so much, but I just wanted to reflect on what Roy said before. And I just thought that it was so wonderfully put, how important our human qualities are at the age of AI, right? And that's putting completely different perspective on our leadership, because now we are not only leading people, we are also leading AI agents. And at the same time, we are leading people who are in fear to be displaced by AI sometimes, right? And who do not necessarily feel or trying to find a new identity in the age of AI. And that's why this human connection, right, that you are bringing forward, and also your parallel with the music world, is so beautiful and so authentic. And that, I think, what will be in the heart of the future of the leadership.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Julia.
Important point.
Agree completely. And of course, in a way, taking some of the words out of my mouth, Julia, but as a key element, one of the things that, as a global phenomenon, for anyone, leaders and frontline personnel during the pandemic, was that we developed at least a common consensus about how life actually has adversity. We managed to build a common appreciation of adversity, of fallacy, of being able to appreciate that that you were individually, You might be turning up in your morning pajamas. You might be sort of struggling with your day-to-day, your mental health, your whatever, because we recognized during the pandemic that we were all vulnerable. To some extent, there's the same thing happening, even though we don't have a pandemic at this point, and not at least a viral pandemic. We do have a digital pandemic. We do have a pandemic of volatility in our global community that has many of the same impacts. But sadly, at this point, yet only the negative side and none of the positive, or a few of the positive. We are all really struggling in a situation where there's a high level of uncertainty, there's a high level of impact on our day-to-day lives, on our mental health, and yet we are not fully able to really identify, if you will, the common viral, because it's not a virus, it's a cultural element that really has that damaging effect on our day-to-day. So, but what is positive, of course, and I think, or I hope that Julia and Roy agrees, that we're coming closer to a situation where that element is one that we can also commonly recognize, that we do indeed share a common bond as human beings, that this is a tough time, that this is difficult, and that we allow ourselves a wider set of appreciation for the fact that you're just simply here, that you're trying to do your best, and we have a wider empathy for the struggle that it is to be human. And that is one that I think would be really cool moving forward, is that we can also try to embed that, because that is a felt experience by most people, by most middle managers, by most CEOs, even though they do not necessarily admit it. That is the reality that they're living in. That is the reality that they're trying to navigate. So thinking of that, if you looked at the journey from 2020, it has been a huge learning experience on how leadership in a time of transition, of a time of uncertainty, really can be done. So not right now, we're in year 6, and slowly, of course, in many different ways, we can recognize that the status quo is no longer fit for purpose. It will not be returning, and we need people with different skills, as Julia said, managing both digital agents and human agents, but are essentially different than the command and control leaders that you were able to use earlier on. So new leaderships are about managing uncertainty, being able to sense, of course, the human qualities, having a higher level maybe also of empathy, and then be able to combine those elements into something where you as a leader also are able to say, I don't know. I don't know, but I'm willing to at least organize the transition with you so that we can use this for something that creates at least closer to something that we can consider synergy among the different things that we have.
Yeah, thank you, Lars. And it's wonderful to hear all your perspectives, because it makes sense that all of you in different ways are actually focused on the human factor, and to be curious about that, and to evolve that even more. Now we might see this as an opportunity to actually have the time to develop some of the more softer skills, and actually focusing on that as leaders. So if you were to sort of, and this is for everybody, if you were to sort of tell me what stood out, or any of the things that are sort of this, you hear that the other people are saying sort of the same, or is it something or are they saying something different from you, or what stands out from this first 20 minutes of our webinar? And please feel free to just jump in. Yeah, right.
Well, I mean, I think that, Lars really stated it well. Things are constantly changing. That's the only thing that is constant, the change. And
Yeah.
so leadership nowadays requires so much of us. We have to be both resilient and flexible. We have to see people for what they need from us, what they are, what challenges they're going through. But at the same time, we have to be high performers. That is not going to change. And that is something that, for example, I focus on my work, my personal work with leaders, is the fact that literally the show must go on. So whether you're tired, whether you're having personal issues, whether we are, for example, having crisis after crisis in the world, that doesn't change that people look up to you as a leader. People need you to be there for them 100%. And, ultimately you have to get the job done as a leader. This is something that isn't going to change. I think even more so, it's going to be something that the focus will shift towards more and more of that high performance culture, because as Julia mentioned so eloquently, if you're not that person, we have AI tools to do that for you. So what will happen is that the people that have the strongest presence, the strongest communication skills, resilience, all that, and of course the ability to motivate, to inspire people around them to really, bring out the best outcomes of their teams. These are the people that will move forward. And of course, our responsibility as leaders is to see the ones that, fall through the cracks, the ones that need our support. But in order to do that, we have to be so self-aware, so present within our consciousness, because things will just get harder in many terms, but easier in other terms. So it is something that being open to those changes and knowing that the one thing that will ultimately stay strong and powerful is the ability to connect to people and to move forward together.
Yeah. Thank
I would
you.
like to build on what Roy just said, because I so much agree with you, Roy. And I think it's a very, very good way of putting it. And also what Lars said before, it brings me to the point of the personal agency. And a personal agent is through the time of change. So let's take example when the war in Ukraine started, right? Lars, you have started the NGO that's helping Ukrainians to escape. My husband happened to be also Lars. He is helping to drive cars to Ukraine, cars from Sweden to Ukraine, to hand it over to Ukrainian military, because they need all the support they have. And this is not something that anyone told you to do. It's just people who are feeling responsible as Europeans, right? As just human beings, to help the nation in need. And that's personal agency. I think the same applies when we work with AI, because we all know that AI is developing every day. But at the same time, it's still very far from being perfect. It's making mistakes. Sometimes it's still hallucinating. So our personal agency in how we structure this work, how we orchestrate the work with AI agents, how we direct it, is at the heart of that type of leadership. So I think just going through this difficult change, the most important part which remains in focus is our critical thinking. It's us being humans and us connecting to each other, and at the same time have agency to manage the difficulties around us and the new technology tools.
Yeah. And that's really interesting, Julia. Interesting point. And also to be aware that those who have really good personal agency are actually also the ones who benefit the best from AI. That's what I'm hearing that you're sort of saying with between the lines, right?
Not necessarily benefiting, but who would maybe have a better position to be in the driving seat. But you're also absolutely right, Nina. There are lots of people who need to have help on this direction, right? People who need to find themselves. And that is a very important point to consider, and make sure that everyone has this opportunity to find their own agency in the way of change.
Yeah, okay, thank you. And Lars?
Well, on a profound level, that's of course one of the key elements that often happens when you have change, because you may have felt some kind of structure, may have felt some kind of agency that you had, and since it disappears, your brain lures yourself into thinking that you are without any agency, that you're without any choice, that you're without tools to do something. So often when we find both from a psychotherapeutic level, but also in self-management programs, one of the key, very profound elements is to get people to sort of, it almost feels like there's senses of the brain that have just lost the connection, and to reconnect that you do actually can make differences for yourself. You begin small sometimes, but you get the idea that actually that there are things, small things that you can actually do, and there's an interconnection between what you decide and what happens in the world around you, whether that's mowing the lawn, that's going for a walk, that's the smaller steps. But in order for you to, I don't know, climb Mount Everest, you need to know that even those small changes would actually lead you somewhere. So, and often you don't start up by climbing Mount Everest, yay, but it begins with you saying, yeah, I can actually make it to the mailbox, or I can actually do that. And then the next day doing something more. But for people, it's not about weakness. It's not about vulnerability. You saw that clearly also during the pandemic. Anyone in any position, in any sort of with any background, can be sort of put in a situation where suddenly they feel lost, profoundly lost, and without agency, and trying to get that switch back sort of into their lives it's not per se hard, but it will not happen simply by chance per se.
Yeah. Thank you. And I think we're going to close this first round, and then a shorter but more deep dive into some of the things that you said. So in this round, I'll just give you 2 minutes, starting with you, Julia. You said something about working with biases and working within a field where people could maybe discover or experience glass ceilings. They want to be a part of something, a new work situation. When we talk about Ukrainian refugees, especially the women who came to Denmark, for example, how to get into a work setting and understanding that it's important to, of course, to be able to take care of your own family and start in a new work setting can be very difficult. But you said something about, as a leader, we need also to work with our own biases. But how can we work with looking at the biases concretely, and also try to elevate the voices that are also needed in the work settings, like the Ukrainian refugees, for example? How do we work with that concretely, in your opinion?
I think it's, like always, it's takes two to tango, right? So it's both sides. It's both on Ukrainians coming in, and it's also on people who already are established. And Denmark, like if we take Denmark and Sweden as an example. So there is obviously, this cultural, there are cultural differences between the groups, and the way to understand each other I think for me, primarily, is to really try to see the human being behind, right? And be aware that, for example, I didn't know that by the time that I was trying to integrate in Sweden, that if you do not speak the language, people will assume that you are dumber. And that's just one of the biases, right, that we all have. And I have noticed I have that as well. Also, when you listen to someone with a very strong accent, you are kind of so distracted by how they say it, that you are losing the focus on what they're saying. I think if we are just aware of that, that's in us, and trying really to get into the human being and see their best abilities, and also from the Ukrainians coming in, trying to understand that it's a different culture, this is a different environment, and the honesty and the trust into the government, into the system, is much higher in Denmark, because Denmark is the least corrupt country in the world, and Ukraine, unfortunately, is one of the most corrupted countries in the world, right? So just that difference makes it completely different attitude for people, how they look at the institutions, how they look at other people, how they look at the leadership. So educating ourselves about the differences, educating ourselves about our biases, and looking at the human being and trying to really relate to the person in front of you. I think that's, for me, that's the only way.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to you, Royd. You of course are we talked a little bit about it before, you mentioned it before. You as a conductor, you can't make music yourself. You are totally reliable on dependent on the entire ensemble. But working with that or learning from that, how do you see leadership in trying to building teams where people are from different cultures, playing with different tunes, playing with different melodies? How do you see that as how can you lead in that ensemble where people are talking, as you, Julia, mentioned it a bit before, also coming from different backgrounds, different cultures? How do you make people to play the same tune as a leader? And maybe sometimes,
Well,
yeah, sorry. Yeah, I have an
no,
additional.
you wanted to finish. Sorry, I didn't hear the
But
last sentence.
one thing that is really important when I work in with clients in therapy is that, of course, that sometimes you need the silence also, because in the silence or in the breaks, that's actually where music is being conducted or is being organized. That if I have to refer that to therapy, it's usually when there is an aha moment for the client, and that's usually something that sort of settles within the client's system. I don't know if that was just an add-on to your thoughts on that. Mhm.
Well, I think it's a really valid question because, the world is getting even more global on that sense. And there's never one company that works only within that office in one city in, one part of the world. For me, I mean, it's a combination of a few things. First of all, as a guest conductor, which all conductors are, this is a part of our profession, coming into an orchestra, having one or two rehearsals, and that's it. So the orchestra members know each other, they perform together on a regular basis, and you're coming, from the outside in, in different countries, different cultures, different perspectives. And so I think it's a mixture of a few things. The first would be to really be centered and know what you're bringing to the table, to be really, really prepared professionally. I mean, that's before how you come across as a person, how your presence is, which is super important as well. But ultimately, to actually know your job, to come fully prepared, to never assume anything, to really respect the people that you're working with, and to do the work, to come in at one level of preparation that is clear to everyone around you that you are the leading figure professionally. So once you have that, you can work on yourself, from the aspect of how you come across as a person,
Mhm.
either your body language, your presence, your overall communication, how you, your facial expressions, all that. But these are tools to help you try and communicate, convey your message to those team members that are based in different locations around the world. And you have to acknowledge within yourself that the message will not be received in the same manner, in the same form, in every different place. So, for example, I've written a few articles about the cross-cultural differences that we have around the world. And I've been really surprised because I just published one article and I saw that the internet went wild over that. And I never knew that it was such an issue. For me, it's obvious that it's important, but I didn't know how people nowadays are looking for information on that exactly, because the teams are global. We're working in a matrix environment. So I would recommend always doing a bit of research. For example, in that article and other ones, I dive into the fact that, in Nordic countries, it's perceived in one way when you come, you have to be there on time, you have to state, the let's say the goal of the meeting really, really clearly. The hierarchy is very, very flat. Usually, things are like that. And when you go to, for example, Japan, South Korea, Latin countries, Arab countries, depending. So the culture is quite different. So most of the interaction is less about business. It's more about the connection. The business side of things happens, in the subtext. And of course, it goes way back, American culture is, of course, a whole other different thing. Russian, Ukrainian culture is a whole different set of rules and, things that we're used to doing in one way or a different way. So for me, it is very important that as a manager, you're very, very respectful of the culture that you're working with. If you're, for example, you're based in Denmark and you're working with someone in Mexico, you have to acknowledge that there's going to be a difference in the basic communication of each different task. And so we need to basically just strip down of all, extra added manners and just state the mission, state the task, state, the things as simply as we can, but to take into account that not everything will be understood in the way that we're used to. So if you do have the time as a leader to just take a minute and study a little bit, even just a little bit goes a long way when you study about different cultures. For example, like in Israel, where I grew up, we had a massive, immigration of Russian and Ukrainian culture. And so for me, it's really easy to work with those types of manners, business manners, because I'm so used to that. And I grew up also in the United States as a child, so that's easy for me. But other countries, for example, if I have to work with, people in the Far East, I have no idea where to start if I don't take the time to really focus on those different cultures. And also not assume that if you go to China, all of China is the same, or all of Ukraine is the same, or all of Latin America is the same, because it's not. So it is a work that, it's constantly something that we have to focus on.
Okay. Really interesting, Royd. And also, it's a little bit aligned with what Julia said about educating ourselves into understanding different cultures and understand
Exactly.
what people are coming from and what forms them into their culture. Yeah. So moving to you, Lars. So you mentioned before about the Aid Ukraine that you started when the war started in Ukraine, and you learned, of course, about trying to lead something in a very uncertain time, but also with a lot of pressure. I imagine that there have been a lot of pressure in the beginning of the urgency of how can we help the best, what is the most good way of using our resources. How do you see that? Is that something that you can translate into leaders today in organizations? The learning that you have from that point of view in your career? You're muted, Lars.
Sorry. Unmute. I learned how to unmute. That's good. Essentially, though, luckily, most of us are not working in an environment with that high level, extreme high level of volatility every day. But of course, it's the basic building blocks that you do when you're in those kinds of crisis situations. It has a lot of applicability to your day-to-day as well. The fact that you never really know, in a way, what the next email will bring. You never really know what type of news that would tick in your, I don't know, your social media. It's so, in that sense of kind of assuming that that you know where you're going to go, that you can have a full sort of structured week ahead of you. If that is what you need, then of course there is at least an ability of how can I also then learn how to tackle the uncertainty in a day-to-day. So training myself also that I cannot allow myself to go into a mode where I think that I have control, because that is a true illusion. So that is one where and going from that experience, just as you would have for most workplaces or in schools, you would have fire drills. It's not because fire happens every day, but you train for fire because it could happen. So, of course, as a leader, maybe you would also sometimes, how can I lead without having access maybe to my mails for a week? How do I do that? I don't know. But you could have a system breakdown. And how do I then manage? Do I still remember all their phone numbers? No, I don't. Do I have them actually in my phone? But training in those kinds of situations for lack of control would be one that you could really sort of appreciate. And it's a combination of you figuring out structures that might help you. It's also at a fundamental level for you to train your brain of not having control. You see as human beings often that people that have experienced anything from loss or grief, having to relocate to a new country, going through a divorce, some kind of element, that of course it's not something that we as human beings strive towards, but they train our brains towards something that gives us new abilities because it reconnects our brain in different ways. The neurological elements of what our brain can do is fascinating. But it's also wired, ironically so, to reduce that element and that component. We are at a fundamental level, biological level, we are built to reduce complexity because we want to reduce the energy that we use. And in a situation what Julia described about language, it's so when we hear an accent, it means that our brain would require using more energy than it's used to, and it doesn't really want to do that. So it tries to steer away from it. But at the same time, whenever you have the opportunity to be with people that speak with an accent, it's also highly likely that they will bring news that you didn't know before. That they are the unique treasure trove of a new perspective that would learn you something new. Sometimes about a cultural perspective, it might be about food, it might be about music. But yay, this is, and I think I used the analogy actually quite in another webinar about this topic. This is like Christmas Eve. You don't know what kind of presents will be under the Christmas tree, but you still kind of know that it will be good. So thinking of these different opportunities like Christmas Eve, some of the presents will be odd from your aunt that doesn't really know what you like, but most of the presents by and large will be really cool and be something that you really appreciate. But being willing to do that. For language, I often, though, specifically compare it to, for those of you that still appreciate sometimes old FM radios, when you don't have the dial completely in tune, it sounds off. And so, but when you spend just some time, the dial will readjust and it will become so much easier as well. And if you don't try, it will always be off. Yeah.
Oh, I really want to add to that, Lars, because I so agree. I mean, I totally agree because I think that we're all really privileged in the sense that we're working with people from around the world. All of us here are used to working with different people from different cultures, and also most of us, we travel, we see different parts of the world. So for us, it might be really simple. But I think the real challenge is to take someone who hasn't left their hometown most of their lives or traveled, to the next town. And the majority of the world is like that. It's unheard of, but that's the truth. The majority of the world doesn't have the actual, opportunity to really travel and to see different cultures. And so what happens is fear comes in. Fear comes in. And everything seems off, as Lars said, the FM channel, everything seems off, everything seems scary. And you might, listen to people speak in another language, and you see that something for you really triggers because, I don't know, you saw in a movie that was the villain, or that was, these stereotypes that were all biased. So I think, I mean, if we can, it's really helpful that we expose people to different cultures, even if they can't travel. So if it's, in the education system, through movies, through different shows or whatever, but also to really acknowledge that we have that bias inherently and in all of us on some level or another. And even if we don't perceive it as fear, what Julia said is really, really powerful. I mean, all of us that speak more than one language know that we have different personalities in each language, and different, one is more emotional, the other one is more professional, the third one might be, like the day-to-day one. So it is something that it's important to notice that it's okay if someone can't really convey that message in a very, very, eloquent way, because that's their second, third, or fourth language. That does not mean that their, that their level of intelligence is in any way or form lesser than anyone else's. So it's all about, being more and more aware of our own, prejudice, basically.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And really important also about what comes up when we are uncertain, or there's things that we don't understand. Usually the primary way of reacting is fear. And we need to aware what's okay. So now this is starting in me. How do I work with that also? And how do I understand that that's actually triggering fear within me? Yeah, Lars, please.
For our children, in a very collective we, there's a bridge between mental health literacy and this element also, because of course, sadly maybe, that's a quirk of human evolution. Anxiety is completely normal. There's nothing wrong with anxiety, and when you're faced with anxiety, there's nothing wrong with you, and there's nothing wrong with the other individual per se. Sometimes, of course, the anxiety is there because human evolution says that you should be conscious of not eating that green thing that sounds off or smells off. It might actually be dangerous. So there's a gut feeling there that's important. But training, of course, and having a talk to our children, to ourselves about anxiety and how anxiety is of course, at one level, is you and your biology speaking, but it's also one that is not, or rather, it's completely natural. So when you're faced with anxiety, it's not about necessarily defending yourself. It's about knowing that it's there. It's not a fight and flight element, or it's not a phoning element either. But it's something that maybe says something that here you have to use a little bit more energy. You have to use a little bit more energy in understanding the other individual, the cultural element, their reactions maybe. But for you to probably know that you do have the skills to navigate this, and the other element probably also has, and the anxiety only really becomes a problem if you flee, or you choose not to actually overcome the situation and figure out how to tackle that one.
Yeah, important. Thank you, Lars. And Julia?
I just want quickly to build on that, because I couldn't agree more with what Lars said. And I have also a personal experience from a friend who I grew up with, and we went to school prior to social media era. And then she told me when she was in her 40s that, you know what, in school, I felt like it's only me who is struggling. And I felt like everyone is having the beautiful life. And when I found out, when in my 40s, that everyone is struggling, it became so much easier for me. So, and that, again, that was before social media. And now I think there is so much pressure on people comparing their lives to the actually non-real lives, but lives that presented on social media, that it creates this tension all the time. And what Lars said, I think, is very important. If we understand that everyone is struggling, and everyone is struggling with their own things, right? And not necessarily they're putting them on the social media, I think that could create a little bit of comfort, understanding, and empathy to each other.
Exactly. And then maybe also have work settings that are actually involving this in some sort of, how do we work with more inclusive and more settings that are actually working with empathy building and trust building tools, but also how to calm your nervous system, how to train that in also within work settings, not necessarily as something that is put on each Monday from 10 to 12, but something that is built within the work organizations. Yes, Lars?
Well, as a add-on to Julia's good point, if you think that leadership is about being strong, you're wrong. Leadership is often about actually being willing to be weak and to show that you do have weaknesses, but that you're also willing to overcome those weaknesses. So the leader that actually creates the space for others to be able to expose their weaknesses is an important element. Especially sometimes you're in situations, of course, you want the team to contribute with their good ideas. If they're scared about sharing their good ideas, they will not share the good ideas, obviously. So being able to create a psychological safety where you either say, I don't know, I do have weaknesses, I appreciate your weaknesses, and I will not fault you for those weaknesses, is the element where you have a small opportunity to be able to for them to actually open up, share their ideas in a space where we actually then can try to use them for good. But when you see on the world stage, sometimes be that Dalai Lama or other leaders that are able to talk about weaknesses, to some extent, of course, that is really where you see them shining. That is where we believe suddenly that this is someone that has human qualities that we are willing to be inspired by and to follow. The strong men, often the strong men, they are not necessarily leaders, but often, as we find, bullies more than leaders.
Yeah. Thank you, Lars.
Also, I wanted to add on that, if I may. I totally agree, Lars. I wanted to add, though, that we should be careful, though, that, we don't just show the weaknesses as an excuse for, being mediocre sometimes. I feel that this is nowadays something that is so common, and so it becomes an excuse. And that I think that excellency is something that we should strive for a bit more. I think that in the past generation, we've done everything to accommodate the needs, of different communities, different cultures, and that's great. But in order to really achieve things, to really, be groundbreaking, especially in research, especially in health, we should make sure that the focus on excellency is something that we don't let go of. Especially nowadays that, the younger generations have a tendency to be triggered by essentially everything. Whereas, life is triggering. Sorry, I mean, it's not politically correct maybe to say it, but life is triggering. That's like the thing that happens every single day. I'm sure in this room specifically, we've all been through really, really crazy things, both personally and others. And so, the thing is, things will happen. The question is what we do when they happen. Do we still focus on getting things done? Or do we say, okay, so today I can't do anything and tomorrow we'll see? And so for me, I think that classical music is a very good school for that. No one cares if you had a bad day.
Yeah.
They don't. They paid to see you in concert. No one cares if you flew around the world and landed 3 hours ago. And so I take that with me into other industries as well and other subjects as well, because I do think that if we just let ourselves be triggered by everything and just it's an excuse that sometimes we should really pay attention to and choose wisely when we accept it and when not.
I agree with, but I guess there's when we perform, there's a space for the uncertainty, and when we ideate, there's a different space for it. But as a leader, also being able to say, to ask for help, to able to say there's something that you don't know. For those that will be seeing or watching this one later, I can strongly recommend the Charlie McCready book about the boy that travels to find a home. And in that, the element about one of the bravest things that you can do is to ask for help. And thus, of course, learning something new.
Because also when you ask other people for help, you actually in that moment also validate their importance for you. So when I ask somebody for help, I also say, okay, so you are important, and I trust that you are able to help me. And that's also
absolutely. And I trust your professional opinion as well, which is amazing for your team. Yeah.
So we are just about to close the webinar. We have 1 minute left. So I won't ask you the last question that I had on my list. I just want to really, really warmly thank you for joining this webinar, and I loved hearing about your different perspectives and passions both within your professional, but also your personal and lived experience. This was truly amazing. I'm so happy that you were able to join, and well, a big thank you. This was enlightening. So thank you for today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.